We are on Luke 22, and we're going to start today going at a slower pace. We're not going to rush anymore. I shouldn't have last week already when I knew that I'd be here for a while. So, but today we'll just slow down. So it'll be a while before we get through Holy Week, get through Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday. Especially because next week for Easter, we won't have Bible study, okay? So we'll be still talking Good Friday for a number of weeks after Easter. Then we'll get into Easter. And once we get into Easter, then I'll start asking you some of your thoughts of what you would like to do with Bible studies after that. But so that's kind of my rough plan. But again, my plans oftentimes change. I make these great plans and then I change my mind afterwards. But I do know that I'm in Luke 22 today. So we'll open with prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you for the blessings that you have granted unto us, the forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation through your rich gifts, gifts that seem like nothing to the world, but for us, they are precious, near and dear to us. Now, by the power of your Spirit, continue to teach us that we might grow always in knowledge of all that you have done for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so Luke 22. Last 2 weeks, we were talking mostly about Tuesday, the longest day in the life of Jesus in regards to all the teaching that he did and stuff. And now, suddenly, notice the first verse, where are we at? I'm sorry? Okay, the plot, but what day are we talking about? The Passover. So this is Thursday. Okay, so nothing happened on Wednesday that is recorded in any one of the four Gospels. Okay, which tends for us to think that he was not in Jerusalem proper at the temple, that he was probably out on the Mount of Olives or wherever else, spending time in prayer and devotions. Now, notice what Luke does here in verse 1. Now the feast of the unleavened bread drew near, and he calls it also the Passover. Now, when you go back into Leviticus, I'm not a real great expert. I could have spent a little more time on this, but when you go back to Leviticus, it talks about all of the church year. It spells out for us all the festivals that the people were supposed to keep. And the Passover and the Feast of the Unleavened Bread was actually two different festivals, but they fell together. And so by the time of Jesus, they were kind of an interchangeable term. And so the Feast of the Unleavened Bread was normally just called the Passover. And the Feast of the Unleavened Bread was 7 days long. The first day was the Passover itself, and then you had 6 more days of eating the unleavened bread. Okay. Luke, again, his audience is basically Gentiles. And so as he's going through his writings, you see it a lot in the book of Acts also. He a lot of times will explain things. If it was a Jewish audience, he'd just say, this is what it is. But because his is a Gentile audience writing to Theophilus, whoever that might mean, there's a lot of things. If we get into Acts, and we can talk more about that. But he's writing to this Gentile audience, so he explains a little bit more. So he explains to them, we're in the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, also called Passover. Wouldn't have had to do that if it was Jews. They would know exactly what he's talking about. So. Oh, that was you. I thought maybe it was the machine back there. And I'm going, what did I say? Okay.
Tuning in there.
So, verse 2. Somebody read verse 2 for me, please.
And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to put him to death, for they feared the people.
So we have the chief priest and the scribes. And again, these are two different, these guys don't like each other. Okay? The chief priests were the chief priest plus a handful of others who are running the temple. They would have, most of the Levites in particular, they had a week at the temple. So when we talk about Zechariah at the birth of John the Baptist, we find him going to do his week at the temple. And at this time, they divided it into 48 weeks. So every 24 weeks, you'd have your next week again. So most of the priests and all the Levites who took care of the temple, they would be on this 1 week schedule, 1 week on, 23 off, another week at the time of Jesus. And this is lots of people that are there. I'm sure during Holy Week, during the Passover, I'm sure they probably called in the National Guard and a few other groups to help with all the sacrifices that needed to take place. Excuse me. And but the chief priests, the liberals, and the Pharisees, the scribes were the learned teachers. The Pharisees, again, were this larger party. Within the Pharisees, you had a number of them that were scribes. They were the ones who interpreted the law, taught the law to the people. Well, these people are now working together. Earlier in the week, we had seen how the Pharisees were very happy when the Sadducees couldn't trap Jesus. They thought they could. But now they're just saying, we got to work together on this. And so, but the big thing is they're afraid of the people. Why are they afraid of the people?
But they want to keep their hands clean from the whole event.
They would like to do that, especially because it is the Passover and they don't want to be unclean during the Passover, or the feast of the unleavened bread. That's a part of it.
Well, wasn't Jesus very popular?
He was popular, wasn't he? Most of these people didn't believe in Jesus, but they couldn't get enough of him. In our vernacular, it would be going to a Trump rally. And all the people that would come. Trump is popular. Therefore, people come and gather around him.
Just to be a part of the movement.
And not just Trump. We could do this on the Democrat side too, and we get these goofballs, liberal lefties, where what's the senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. He's been attracting quite the crowds as well. So it doesn't matter which side. People like to be around famous people, but now with Jesus, it's a little bit different, because one of the big things that has just happened was Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And this is huge. We'll run into this coming up shortly. They are fearful of the crowd because the people know that Jesus is something, a great prophet. Okay? And so they couldn't wait. Palm Sunday comes, and there's people everywhere. They are so excited because they think he is the Messiah, and they're right, he is the Messiah, but they have no clue what the Messiah means. Okay? And they really expect, it's kind of like people in our society where the Dems can do no wrong or the Republicans can do no wrong, and we just follow them. Well, Jesus is now in that kind of a camp where people, they've been following him throughout his ministry. Many have seen him, but understand how many people are in Jerusalem. I got to look at my notes. During the time of Nero, so shortly after this, 255,600 lambs were killed in Jerusalem at the temple. And they said about 2.5 million people were in Jerusalem because of the Passover.
I was going to say, because that would be a lamb for a family.
For a family, or
Yeah.
even two families
Or two
coming
families, right.
together,
200.
because they have to burn the rest if they didn't need it, or at least in theory. I'm
Right.
sure some put it in the refrigerator to save it for leftovers.
They had the dog bags.
If they couldn't afford a lamb, would there be something smaller, or lamb was the big thing?
The lamb was very important, but if you couldn't afford it, you went together with other people
Okay.
to do it, and because there would be a lot of people that would not be able to afford that.
Well, and there was also, wasn't there smaller families probably that, you know, a lamb, they would not be, because like you said, they had to consume the whole thing.
Yes. So we're talking about 2.5 million people in Jerusalem about as Jesus comes into Jerusalem for Palm Sunday. And they are excited. Herod is not so excited. Pontius Pilate is not so excited. Every time there's a Passover, the extra soldiers were brought into town because you had people like Barabbas who tried to overthrow Rome, were killers, you know. We would call them terrorists today. Okay, somebody like a Barabbas. So these people come, they're excited. Here is Jesus, who the word the Christ or the Messiah is being thrown around. And is this the one? Again, remember, for 400 years, there's no prophets. And then John the Baptist comes along 3 years before this. And people are really excited about John the Baptist, but then he's put to death by Herod. And so people had all sorts of strange ideas about who is Jesus. Could he be John the Baptist, come back from the dead? Could he be Jeremiah, was one of the words that was thrown out. Or
Was it Elisha?
Elisha or Elijah, you know. So one of the prophets, at the very least. And so the people are very excited, but this makes the power people, and by the way, the Sadducees didn't care that Rome was in power. For them, it was all right. The Pharisees were different, okay? They really believed that Israel had to separate themselves from Rome. But the Sadducees, they were perfectly fine as long as they had power. They knew which side their bread was buttered on. Okay? But they're afraid of the people. They want him dead, but they're afraid. Somebody read verses 3, 4, 5, 6.
Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, who was of the number of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and the officers how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he consented and sought an opportunity to betray to them in the absence of a crowd.
Okay, so we don't know exactly what the whole conversation was about, but we pick up little pieces here. There's money involved. Another place, it was 30 pieces of silver, which was 4 months' wages. Okay, so we're talking a lot of money in of what we're talking about here. Judas was a member of the 12. He was the only one from Judea. The rest were all from Galilee, by the way. Little side note there. And now Satan has entered into him. So we get a little picture. We see little pictures of Judas throughout the 4 Gospels. Here is Luke's attempt to explain what is going on. We don't really have a reason necessarily on why Judas does what he does. Okay? And as a pastor, I'm always a little careful. It's kind of fun to guess, but in the end, it's a guess. We don't say, thus says the word of the Lord. Okay? It sure seems like there was a love of money that came into it. The gospel, according to John, talks about Judas as one who controlled the money bags, and he would help himself. Yeah, that's right, to some of the money in the money bag and stuff. He is also the one that complains just when Jesus is approaching Jerusalem, and Mary anoints his feet with this very expensive perfume. He's the one that complained because the money could have been given to the poor. But yet, he's also the one that took money out of the money bags. It kind of sounds like a lot of stuff that still takes place in our day and age of people cheating the government by running scams, having daycares or old folks' homes or whatever, and then there's nobody there, but they know how to do it. Judas was like that. Okay? So he comes, he confers with the chief priests and the officers how he might betray him. They're glad, they're happy. But notice as a part of this, it says that he's going to do it when? When there's no crowd. The Sadducees and Pharisees know they cannot do it publicly on the street because the people would rebel against the Jewish leaders. So this is a part of the plan then to make sure that it's being done in a quiet way. I think I had a note here. Anyway, we'll go on. Keep this in mind in 2 seconds. It's interesting how Luke does this. He goes from we need to do it without a crowd, and now look at what Jesus does next. Then came the day of the unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John saying, go and prepare the Passover for us that we may eat it. And here, Jesus does not make it public where they're going to eat the Passover meal. It's kept just between the three of them. Why? So Judas doesn't know. Yeah. So Luke doesn't say, well, Jesus didn't want Judas to know. He just says they're looking for an opportune time. And then the next verse says, go and do this, the two of you. Go ahead. So it just flows very well on their purpose for doing that. Where will you have us prepare it? And he says, behold, when you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. First off, men don't normally carry the jar of water. That's a woman's job. Okay, so this is kind of bizarre to see a man carrying the jar. And then he gives them instructions of what to say to him as well. What does this tell us about Jesus? He knows what's going to happen. Why does he know that? God, yeah. The omniscience of God comes shining through here. He maybe talked to this guy at some point before. We aren't told. Part of this also is it was very common in Jerusalem that people would have an extra spot in their house for the guests coming from other areas. So it could have simply been, this is an empty house where we're able to do this at, or maybe Jesus had talked to him ahead of time and said, we're going to use your house. But there's a word in here. Tell the master of the house, the owner of the house is the idea of the master. The teacher says to you, where's the guest room? The word teacher is not normally used by Jesus' followers. It is usually being used by people who don't necessarily believe in him, but they saw him as a great teacher. So one of the persons that I read, said, well, this gives us a clue that probably this person is not a believer. Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to go there or not, but maybe. I do like one of the professors at the SEM opened my eyes to something that I thought was pretty cool. In all four of the Gospels, never does the writer of the Gospels call himself, I wrote this Gospel. Okay, what does John do? Yep, the one that Jesus loved. Matthew, he simply does what? Calls himself the tax collector. Okay, Luke, golly, how
We always say the physician, but I don't think that's what he said.
Yeah, he is a physician. I'm trying to think in the Gospel of Luke exactly how he does this. He writes, oh, shoot. I should have looked this up ahead of time. He refers to himself, but not as, in the first couple of verses, inasmuch as I have attempted to put together this narrative for you, O Theophilus, and I have talked to all these eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. So he refers to himself kind of as a collector of the facts.
He's an observer. It sounds like he's saying, I've witnessed all of this. He's giving testimony.
Yeah, and he doesn't necessarily become a follower of Jesus until the book of Acts. But he's this historian that has grabbed all this information. He's been traveling with Paul, so he gets the eyewitness of Paul. But as he traveled with Paul, he gets to meet all the other apostles as well. Pretty good idea that he also talked to the women as you look deeper into some of the Gospel of Luke. Mark. Now we come to Mark, and we kind of go, does Mark point himself out at all? One of my professors said, did you have something on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, a lot of times they've said that the guy who ran away in the book himself
Yes.
was Mark, and that Mark got his book, like Peter was telling Mark everything.
Yes. Yeah. Mark, John Mark, Paul didn't think a whole lot of him in the gospel or in the book of Acts. It's kind of a fun story. And yet here's this very important person. But yes, many people, conservative pastors in our church body, believe that the guy who ran away naked in the Garden of Gethsemane was John Mark. And they believe that he was there in the Garden of Gethsemane because it was his house. And so when they left his house to go out to the garden, that Mark would have followed and watched where they went. So he happens to be in the garden, not necessarily as a part of the believers. Maybe he was on his way to that or whatever. We don't know for sure. But yes, it appears that is a good possibility that it's John Mark, or most of the time we just say Mark. So pretty cool that each of the writers puts himself into the gospel, but nothing as somebody that's important. Almost, if this is Mark, this is really cool because he puts himself down a little bit by running away with the rest of the disciples in the garden. So kind of cool. Oh, shoot. Okay, so they go and they prepare, and the preparation takes a bit. I mean, they got to go make sure that the 1-year-old lamb without spot or blemish is killed. Along with that, you have to prepare the other pieces of the meal, the bitter herbs. There was a sweet, oh, Debbie, do you remember what that stuff was called, the sweet stuff? Huh? Arosa? Is that what you said? Okay. We did a number of Seder meals down through the years, and it was kind of fun to do that with the congregation as we tied all these things together. So they're preparing all these things, getting everything ready, and then the hour comes. Now, Luke, as much as he is the historian, he's not always so concerned with putting everything in chronological order. He oftentimes will simply put it in the order that fits the narrative. So we're going to stop here, but I want you to just pay attention that we have the institution of the Lord's Supper, and then we have the question about who is the greatest. It appears that who is the greatest would have come before the actual partaking of the Lord's Supper. They were in the middle, they had started, but that what Jesus does next in washing the feet and discussing who is the greatest would have came before the actual institution of the Lord's Supper. Okay, I'll just throw that out for you right now, and we'll talk more about that afterwards.
I have a question, because in verse 3, it's talking about Satan and Judas,
Yes.
and it was always my understanding from the other gospel accounts that it was during the Passover meal that he got up and left,
Yes.
not prior to the Passover
Yes.
meal.
You're right. He gets up during the middle of the meal and leaves to go tell the authorities where Jesus is, where he's going, sort of a thing. But there was a preparation for that. He had to go talk to the priests first, settle on a price. He had to make sure that it was worth his time and effort. So before, sometime during Holy Week, he says, I will. But here's my guess. Is he goes to the priests and he says, listen, we will be celebrating the Passover at some time, and when that happens, I will let you know so that you can come and arrest him in a quiet place. And Judas would have known that the Garden of Gethsemane was the place that Jesus went often to spend time in prayer with the disciples. So, yes, but there was the preparation beforehand where Satan enters into Judas to set all the pieces in order for him. Then Jesus says, when Jesus says, one of you will betray me, and Judas says, is it I, Lord? And he said, you have spoken. Jesus basically saying, yes, you know that it's you.
I was listening to something just day before yesterday, an account that was suggesting that, of course, we're familiar with where Jesus says to Judas, what you're going to do quickly.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it was suggested in this study that I was listening to that Jesus, because it was also made clear that Satan had entered Judas, that Jesus was actually speaking not to Judas, but to Satan.
To Satan.
And telling Satan what you're going to do.
Interesting thought. I'll keep that in mind when we go deeper into it, and I'll look a little bit more
That was a
at
suggestion
that thought.
was made, was that he wasn't-
Yeah, no.
wasn't talking to Judas, he was
I would not be opposed to that. Definitely Satan is led, or Judas is led by Satan, but that does not mean that Judas didn't do it. Judas was still, of his own free will, decided he was going to betray Jesus. Satan gives him the nudge. And we know with our sins how often it happens that there are precipitating things that go into our decision to do a certain sin. I'll just do an affair, office affair. How often doesn't it happen that the boss, starts putting his hand on the shoulder of the secretary, and just it slowly develops. It doesn't happen where suddenly they decide they're going to have an affair. There's a build up to it. Well, this is kind of in that way as well, where Satan enters into Judas. They make a plan with the priests. But it is fun when you put all four of the Gospels together and interweave them, that you get maybe a fuller understanding of how these things all played out. And not everybody always agrees when they're looking at the four Gospels exactly, is this part belong here or does it belong there, kind of a thing. It was my practice in my churches that during Lent, I would read the whole Passion account from the beginning to the end on the Wednesday nights. So I took the 6 weeks, plus the Good Friday service as well, so that we had plenty of time to digest what is going on in regards to Jesus' life. And I would use the Passion account from all four tied together. So as I looked at different people who did it, they didn't always agree exactly, did this come first or did this come first? We'll do this a little bit when it comes to the Lord's Supper. When Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, there was 3 cups. Some have suggested there was 4 cups. Some have suggested the 4th cup didn't come historically until later on. I always taught that there was 4, but it doesn't really matter. But during the process of the meal, one of these cups is when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, giving them the bread and the wine. So.
I have another question.
Yep.
Maybe next time touch on it, because it's probably a hard answer. Somebody say that at that time that there was a certain group of people that celebrated Passover one time, a certain group the other, so that Jesus both celebrated the Passover and was crucified on the Passover. I didn't know if that was true.
Yeah. There are some interesting people out there. There are people who believe that Jesus did not die on Friday. They died on Thursday. I don't know if this is where it's coming in at.
They were like, he died, they said, he died on Friday, but there was a group that did Passover on Thursday, and then there was a group that did Passover on Friday, so he was both celebrating Passover.
Here's the difficulty. For the Jewish people, when does the new day begin?
When the sun sets.
When the sun sets. So tonight, when the sun sets, we're in Monday. So that's the struggle that we in the West have with putting the pieces together on Jewish calendars, is that, are we talking about Thursday night, which would be Friday? That type of thing. So I remember a number of years ago going into great detail on Holy Week and exactly my thoughts on how it all played out. I'm too old to remember what I taught in that Bible study. But that's part of the struggle. These people who say that, and another part of it is, I was mentioning people who believe that Jesus died on Thursday because he had to be in the tomb for 3 days. For 25 years, I received information from this group. I have no idea why I did, but they kept sending it. Occasionally I would read it. But they didn't understand how the Jewish mindset worked, because for the Jews, any part of one day is a whole day. So when Jesus goes into the tomb on Friday, as long as it was 1 minute before sundown, it's Friday. Okay? And then he would be in the tomb all day Saturday, and then 1 minute after sunrise, or even 1 minute after sunset on Saturday, it's Sunday. So he could have been in the tomb for 24 hours and 2 minutes, and it would have been 3 days in the Jewish mindset.
Right.
All we know is that he was put to death, went into the tomb, Sunday morning, the body wasn't there. That's what we know. Did he rise at midnight? Did he rise at 10 o'clock before midnight? Did he rise at 4 o'clock. None of that matters. But if people don't understand Hebraic thought process, they would totally miss all of that. So, okay, yes.
Talking about Passover on Thursday, Passover on Friday. Many of the Jews celebrate Passover the first 2 nights. The first night Passover and the second Seder on the second night. So
Okay.
it's observed 2 days in a row.
See, and that's the thing that Luke was doing when I talked about the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, also called the Passover. These two tied together, and there were all sorts of rules, and then interpretations of the rules by the scribes on what needed to be done. And so that whole week, there is no leavened bread found in the household. And so, in a sense, all the meals are a part of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. But there are certain things that are done during that festival. And I think, again, that's a part of that struggle with, are we talking about during the time of Christ? Are we talking about 500 years later? Are we talking about today? Because different traditions develop at different times on how the Seder should be done. And the scribes during the time of Jesus, they had it all spelled out. Do this, 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 and this. This is how you keep the Passover. This is how you keep the Seder meal. Okay, so that's some of the struggles that we run into, because the Seder is somewhat the same today as it was 2,000 years ago, but it probably a number of differences that have come into play. It's kind of fun. I used the Jews for Jesus material when I did my Seders. And so they would pass on their traditions through these Seders, and that we participated in them.
We had one here once.
Okay.
I was gonna say,
for Jesus did it here.
a number of years ago. we
Yeah.
had-
They're kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
There's great insight. You know, you save the spot for Elijah at the end of the table. So if this is the year, maybe Elijah will come back. So we save that spot at the end of the table. Every household would do that. Every household, the youngest person in the household would ask the question about the Passover. And the head of the household every year would then explain. And so it really was an order of service. Okay, just like our orders of service, they had orders of service as well that they would do. So, okay, let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Very good. Have a great rest of the day. See you, the Lord willing, on Thursday. For those that will be around, those that are traveling, the Lord's blessings go with you, keep you safe from all harm and danger. I am heading to the hospital to go see Wendy. So she wants the Lord's Supper. So
I'm gonna go to the public over here just to
yes,
try to get some money for clothes.
yeah. Gail was able. Gail.